Okay, we are going live. Welcome everyone to this Thursday afternoon, where we are presenting this session on e-learning design guidelines. My name is Nancy.
And I'm Sepideh.
And today we are going to take you through a lot of very important material. Our agenda is as follows. We are going to talk about LXD being learning experience design. We're also going to talk about LXD specifically for e-learning. We're going to look at some design samples, give some thoughts about it. We're going to talk about some considerations that we should give when we are designing e-learning objects and materials. We're going to look at a few before and after examples to give you an idea of the difference. And we have prepared and will share with you a checklist of things that you want to watch for based on what we're talking about today. So you don't have to make any furious notes. We're happy to provide that information to you at the end. We're also going to share our resources and of course have some time for questions and comments at the end. The session is being recorded, and as we are beginning here today, perhaps we can all just take a moment to acknowledge the land that we are on and where we are all participating in this webinar from. Thank you. Okay, this is a very interactive session, so be ready to participate. We are going to start off this session to get an idea from you where you are with how important you think design is to learning. So on a scale of 1 to 5, can you put in the chat a number, with 5 being very important, 1 being not important at all? How important do you think design is to learning? What do you think about that? Okay, we have coming in 5 plus, actually a 10. I love it. I love it. Yes, we feel the same way, which is why we thought it was important to get out and share what we have experienced and what we have learned with regard to the importance of design to learning. So when we speak about learning experience design in and of itself, we're talking about setting the stage for learning something, and that means removing barriers. And removing barriers can happen in many, many ways. So, for example, we want to make sure that everything is efficient and effective. We want to help learners have their information easier to learn and retain. We want to make sure that what we're doing supports and enhances that whole cognitive and affective processes for learning that it involves. And the whole learning experience design encompasses inclusivity and accessibility practices. It includes equity-centered design, and it involves acknowledging biases and our inequities, and of course, our territory rights and decolonization. So when we think of that whole learning experience, think about what would happen if I were to start a class or a session or have videotape with the following. Welcome to our course, everyone. We will be talking about several aspects of design. And to kick off our session, I would like to acknowledge a few things. I'm a white, cisgender settler with gray hair and glasses. I am middle-aged and I'm wearing a green blouse. I acknowledge that I have implicit biases and have contributed to racial inequities, and that I am forever a student in actively becoming anti-racist. I acknowledge that I have been born and have resided on Turtle Island, specifically on land where the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Mississaugas of the First Credit Nations lived, and I respect this land. Now, that in itself is an inclusive introduction, and that is part of the learning experience that would help break down any barriers to learning. So that is part of this design, but there is another part too, and that's the part we're going to focus on here today, which is the part that talks about physical materials and learning objects. Objects that you would consume on a screen, electronic screen. So let's go to our second question that we would like you to participate in. In the chat, could you please type one word or short phrase how you would describe your knowledge of e-learning design? And thank you to those who have put in the chat your land acknowledgements. Okay, so on this call, we have people who are always growing constantly. Good, beginner, experiential, insufficient. Love that from Vesna. Extensive, but always ready to learn more. Sure, if there's just one thing you can pick up today or something else just makes that connection with you, that is helpful. So we're always learning. So thank you for sharing those words. As we talk about e-learning design, how it relates to LXD, we're going to look at some common principles about LXD for e-learning design. So Sepideh, when you're ready, would you enlighten us about that?
Sure. Thank you very much, Nancy, for that background and the beautiful acknowledgement. So let's talk about a little bit about what LXD is for learning. In a nutshell, learning experience design is a learner-centered process of developing effective learning experiences. To achieve such an outcome, designers use techniques such as using mnemonic devices to support recall, presenting information in multiple formats, like lectures or text or graphics or audio or video or hands-on activities, posting documents in a learning management system so they are accessible to students, and making use of design checklists like we will do here at the end of the session. In the next few slides, we will show how some of these suggestions can be materialized in online courses. To this end, we have taken some examples from Avenue.ca, which you know is the Moodle-based online and blended learning solution for IRCC-funded settlement language training. Some examples are from older legacy courses, and others are from more recently developed PBLA modules. We have used a checklist of features to create this presentation, and this checklist was adapted from uxmatters.com. So our first rule would be to use a combination of text and visuals, not just text. So you would want to make sure that the balance is there, that you don't have too much text or the visuals don't overpower the slide or the page which you are viewing. And this would make the activity look real when you have a picture, and you can see the speech bubble here. It looks like you are in that context and you can hear the conversation there in person. So our next rule would be that if you're using visuals, they don't have to be too complicated or busy to be effective. Some visuals can be used just to make the point, a very simple visual like this one. Also, you would want to make sure that the visual is relevant to your topic, because I'm sure that you've had the experience of a course that had a lot of pictures, lots of graphics, but it was difficult to connect the image to the content. So when designing activities, it is good practice to have the reading and the visuals alongside each other. So users would not need to click on a next or previous page to read the passage and then click on a different page to answer the questions. So here you can see two examples of a more recently developed course. It was a learning object, H5P. You can see there is voice here, a voice narration, and you can see the picture, and the question is right next to the picture. In the other example, you can see a tiny picture, a small short reading passage, and the questions that are next to the reading. And this is from an older Avenue Legacy course. So use avatars or characters or voices to give life to the activity and make it feel as if the person or the avatar was present in the context. So in this slide, there is a voice that is reading out the task instructions. There is the image of Adam, which is also repeatedly used throughout the activity in the next slides, and you would feel that Adam is a real person and he's really there. You can feel his presence through this activity. So try using the chunking principle, like one concept at a time and one navigation system at a time. So if you take a look at this example, the designer has focused only on different forms of the verb to be. So there's no vocabulary, there's no other structure being assessed or practiced on the slide. It's only one chunk of grammar, and that's the verb to be, which is being delivered here. Right, so try to use real-world context for relevancy. Real-world situations can enrich the task and make it relevant to users. Many of us have encountered a poster similar to this one in schools, colleges, and neighborhood community centers. In the next activity, the developers have used two characters in the real-world context of a cafe to teach the pronunciation of the sound ah in familiar words such as coffee shop, hot chocolate, fruit tart, waffle, and other words with the ah sound. Right, so try to provide informative feedback in the objects and in the questions, not just a good or bad or correct or incorrect response. So if you take a look at this activity over here, when the student chooses the incorrect response, there is feedback which is informative. It not only says that the answer is incorrect, it also provides a short explanation about why that answer is incorrect. And this is really important, especially for Avenue users. Choose tools based on the learning activities which are available to you on the platform. So for example, on Avenue, you can use books, you can have videos, you can have ordering scenarios, you can show and hide the activities, you can use checklists, calendars, user progress bars, and you name it. So you're already familiar with this, but it's really important to try to use the activity that can maximize the effectiveness of your teaching. Now it's maybe teaching something or assessing, maybe it's a skill building activity or skill using, but whatever it is, if you choose the right activity to materialize it, the learning object would be better received. And so finally, be flexible about what the learner can do. Allow some control for the learner. Sometimes you can let the learner decide what to do in activity and how they want to do it. For example, when adding audio to a task, you usually have the option of adding an audio player. And this is very helpful because it will give the users control of when and how to start and stop the audio. They can sometimes adjust the playback speed, and they can start or restart from the beginning if they want to. They can scrub, they can navigate. So they basically have control over how they want to listen to that audio, which is really important. So now that you have some basic ideas about what is involved in learning experience design, let's have a look at some things that learning designers had better not do when they are creating their learning materials.
Oh, yes, that's great. Let's look at this sample number 1. What can we see here in this learning object? Well, we see there's a little bit of navigation. We see that there's an image, there's some characters here. There's some sort of title at the top. But my question to you is, does this e-learning object look approachable to you? And is there anything that could be improved here? So I invite you to go to the chat and let me know what you might improve on in this item. What looks off to you? So just go with your gut reaction. It doesn't have to be perfect, but what would make it better? Too many visuals. Yeah, it's like there's a lot of visuals going on here. And I wonder too, the visuals seem to all to be looking off the page. They don't seem to be coming together sort of in a cohesive way. Colors a bit jarring. Yes, that font, I agree. Too many different colors. Like it's not a color party, right? It looks a bit distracting, too glaring. Yeah, what's the theme of this? What's it all about? Yeah, and what's the topic? Welcome to the lesson. Is it about tools? Is it about soccer, sports, handshakes? Who knows? And good point, Sue. What are you supposed to be doing now? You just stare at it and you have to try to figure it out because there's no real focus. What do you do next? These are all the things that you instinctively look at and go, this, I need help. You have to show guidance on where to go and what to do next. We're going to talk about that as a principle later in this webinar. Let's look at our second sample. And what you can see here, there's an image, there's an audio bar under that image, and there's a whole lot of text. What you can't tell from the static screenshot is that the audio is just verbatim what is in the text on the screen. So it's just reading that transcript. What is your gut reaction to sample number 2? You can type in the chat, please. Just as a design. Does it look good? Does it look okay to you? The text's too small, that's for sure. Where's the focus supposed to be? Is it on the text? Is it on the image? Is it on the audio? Yep. Depends what level it's for. Yep, that's a good point. Does the audio need a label? It doesn't look balanced. Good point. Where do you click? What do you do? The font, Times New Roman, never a first choice. Too much text. Where are the instructions? Awesome. This is way too much information on one page. And knowing that the audio is just a replication of the text. Do we need the text there? Are there just certain points that we can bring out? I know we're language teachers. We want to provide information in different modalities. And that may mean, being some text support, but you don't need to have it remain on the page the whole time. You should be able to trigger it on or trigger it off if there is that need for learning and having that there. And yeah, what are the instructions? What are we supposed to be doing here? So, good points. Our last sample number 3. Now, in this sample, you see that there is some navigation. We've got images. At the very top, believe it or not, that is a title. It is yellow text on a white background, so perhaps you can barely see that. And certainly that contrast could be improved. What is your gut reaction to this one? Yeah, yellow text on white. Yeah, I'm with you, Elizabeth. I can't even see what that says. What could we improve on this? The buttons are not aligned. Yes, that would drive me crazy. What is she doing? Yes, is this supposed to be representative of something? Name of the topics. Oh yeah, we'll just call them topic 1 and topic 2. What are these topics actually about? Reading, writing, skills, like who knows? Is she sticking out her tongue? Yeah, I think she is. All caps might be inaccessible to screen readers. Yep. Very busy. Oh, those colors. Purple, white text on purple doesn't read very well. When you use a darker color in the background and a lighter color for that, you almost have to bold the whiter color to be able to be strong enough against that contrasting back color. Yeah, what do we do next? Align those blocks. What are those green buttons at the bottom? All excellent points. So we see here the colors, the alignment, the lack of focus. What am I supposed to do now? That contrast isn't quite right. Where do we look first? And it's information overload. If you're faced with that, you might as well grab a coffee and sit down and figure out what you have to do next. Thank you all for your responses. That's great feedback. And we wanted to share these because I want you to know that how you feel about looking at something matters as much as any guidelines or rules that we can tell you. If something is off. So generally, what you have been doing has probably been okay. It can just be perhaps better. You could follow some guidelines to make sure that certain things are covered off, which will lead us into our next topic, which is the considerations for e-learning design. So in the next half dozen slides, I'm going to be talking to you about things that we have picked up on as being extremely important to e-learning design. And at the center of all these is white space. Now, we're language learners, and we're language teachers. We could be language learners too. But as teachers, we want people to learn words. And so we want to add a lot of words. And it's probably counterintuitive to have language teachers focus a lot on white space. But white space is queen. Or king now, perhaps I shouldn't say. But it is the number one. It's at the center of all design. Okay, so think of your screen or what you're developing as a sort of grid. And what you want is an easily repeatable design. And you're going to see something like this here over my next half dozen slides. It is going to be a repeatable image so that I don't have to put any cognitive processing power into what I'm seeing and what I'm learning, and it will open up other channels to take in and hopefully retain information better. As an FYI, design, as we've identified, is very important. But did you know that even PowerPoint now has a design helper that you can activate in PowerPoint that helps let you set up things on your screen in a way that is, I would say, approachable. It will make suggestions on the layout. So that could help you in that form. And again, looking at these, the more you're exposed to them, the more you think about it when you look at things, the easier, pardon me, it will come to you. So when it comes to e-learning, there is a basic design to consider, plus how things can be viewed on electronic devices. So this is where we're going to look at 5 different things when it comes to design. Sorry. The first thing we're going to talk about is readability. As you can see in this picture, white space is at the center of design. So I've actually made a graphic showing you that white space is at the center and that there will be all of these different items we're going to talk about. And the one that I want you to pay attention to is highlighted. And you know that there are others, that they are there, but now we are on the readability area of this topic. So what about readability? I know we have to deal with CLB levels, and if we're teaching link levels, and where we should be. Readability is always important, but not many people know that you can actually run your writing through a readability index to see at what level what education level a person should have to be able to read your text. So what does this mean? Well, there was something created called a FOG index, F-O-G. And what it is simply a mathematical calculation that talks about the years of formal education that is required to read something. So to a general audience, and so I'm not talking about a second language learner, we would write to a grade 8 level for adult comprehension. We'll say, well, you know, a lot of us, we read at a level higher than grade 8. But for common understanding, simplicity, we want to write to a grade 8 level. Again, this is for a non-ESL situation. So with this index, a flesh reading index, and again, we'll pop these names and links into the chat as we go on. They give a score between 1 and 800 based on this mathematical calculation. So if you score 70 to 80, then that's about a grade 8 reading level for a non-ESL person. If you want to adjust that scale, you can bring that grade level down for reading. There's also something called the Flesch-Kincaid scale, which sort of works at it at the opposite and tells you that you need a grade 10 or easier to be able to read. You can actually copy paste what you've written and type it onto a web server and put it onto the screen, and it will calculate those scores for you. It's actually built right into Microsoft Word. If you've ever used that, you could go in and use that. So if you type your text in Word, or you're giving a reading passage and you ever want to check this, that's a great way to do it. You want to make sure when you're writing that you write simple sentences, and you want to avoid 3-syllable words if you can. Now, of course, sometimes we have to teach 3-syllable words, and so all this is going out the window, but it does help you realize how simple is best. You want to make sure that your instructions are level appropriate. So whenever you're creating a learning object, I know it's easy to fall into that, oh, my students know how to do this sort of exercise. I don't have to do it, or I don't have to write formal instructions. I can just write casual. We recommend that you write formal instructions for everyone, because the whole idea around learning objects is for them to be reused with different students, different audiences. And so you don't know whether they've encountered this type before, or they need to be reminded of it. So you want to make sure that there's always that consistency. For readability, you also want to make sure that your text is aligned properly. So if you're doing 2 columns, you want to make sure that they are properly spaced and aligned perfectly for that. You don't want to be using your cognitive power to have to figure all that and make allowances, when you should be using your cognitive power to be learning. The text size. Obviously, we take this into account when we're working with different CLB or link levels. But here's one for the electronic screen. When you create a learning object on a screen, you want to be able to enlarge it up to 200%. If you can enlarge it up to 200%, and there is no overlap of different items, then you know that that can be accommodated on a smartphone without things sort of messing up and doubling on top of each other. So just some little things to think about when it comes to readability. When we look at the next thing we want to talk about, we talk about accessibility. And of course, we could do a whole program about this topic. Some of the highlights here are, though, doing with screen readers, particularly, that have to read it, to help everyone use headings, fonts, and bullets consistently. So whatever you have, use them again, because the mind will help skip over those things and go easily to what you're trying to remember, as opposed to trying to sort out what it is like. It's also way easier for a screen reader to use. If you're using tables, you want to make sure that you use text styles consistently. Make sure you have titles on those tables. Caption it if it's a figure. If you're using a table, have headings and rows and borders. You want to be able to help clarify and distinguish information when you're doing that. Also, use the tab or the indent key. Use something consistently, not individual spaces, because if you use spaces, they're all proportional. So if I have 5 spaces on my keyboard and then I put a letter, if I try to do that on the next one and I use a different letter, because those first letters are proportional, it'll look like they're skewed, which again messes with your brain. One thing, be very careful when using a visual drag and drop. 2 reasons for this. One is accessibility. For those who have visual impairments, it may be difficult to see where one is to connect it with another if they can't otherwise. The second reason, particularly with e-learning, is that drag and drop is very difficult to do on a smartphone because you don't have a lot of real estate on that screen. You know, it's great if you have a nice monitor in front of you and a lot of space to click and drag and drop things into there, but use it use it sparingly, and know that there are some drawbacks to drag and drop. Images. Okay, so what we all hear about, I'm sure, is adding alt text to images. This is so that if an image does not display correctly, a description with words will display instead. Now that is great for screen readers to pick up on. It's also very helpful to me when I'm developing materials, because it reminds me what, if there's a broken link there, what object, what image it is I have to go back and find to put in there. So have that alternative text for image. When you're putting images in, put them in as high resolution as possible. And then if you need to, compress them from there. So usually a 72 pixel image is fine for web use, but you want to make sure that you have the resolution and go down, because going from a low resolution and going up, it just really, it loses the resolution on it. Big point for diversity and images. Bring in more diversity into your pictures, please. We have a lot of conversations and discussions about this. Bring in elderly, bring in LGBTQ, bring in Indigenous photos, show people doing everyday things, normalize and include. That is all part of breaking down these barriers to learning. And whenever possible, add closed captions or subtitles, if you can, to your images. When it comes to audio and visual, Sepideh has spoken about this earlier. Always allow player controls. So that scrubbing, being able to go to a certain spot, being able to start and stop it. In YouTube, you can do things like speed control. I think it's 1.8 is, or 80%, sorry, 80% is a very good slowed down percentage to slow down, to understand, for comprehend for English language learners. In YouTube, you can teach your students how to do that, or you can give them instructions on how to do it. Also, you can give instructions on how to repeat the last couple of words. A lot of hints and clues you can do there. Number one, and this is particularly my beef, but it's not just my beef, do not use autoplay. Autoplay for audio video means as soon as you open that screen, something will start playing, a video or an audio. And that is just bad design. Every time it happens, the first thing that happens in a learner's brain is that, oh my gosh, I haven't even seen what's on the screen. All of a sudden I'm bombarded by audio or video moving. I don't know what's important. I have to stop it. And so you're breaking the learning cycle. You're breaking that smooth flow that you're going into. So please allow the audio or video to be turned on and off and controlled in all sorts of ways, but don't have it automatically start when you load the page. Coming to our last area, layout. Now, one of the things you've seen here is that I have worked with this layout to show you what we're focusing on at any one time. The things like readability and accessibility, the images, audio, visual, you know they're there, they're in the background, and they're processing with what is the topic we're currently working on, which is layout, dealing always with white space because it's at the center of design. So we can say a lot about layout. And again, these are on the checklist, so you'll be able to go through. We talked earlier about chunking, and chunking is the term used to divide your modules, your units, your sections into spoon-sized material, which means short paragraphs. The general rule is 50 to 75 characters per line, or if you're using columns, 40 to 60. And you want, now it's not a hard rule, it's a suggestion. Remember, again, these are guidelines, okay? As we saw from the earlier examples, we want to use contrasting colors. We want to have navigation that's easy to find and easy to use. We want to make sure that if we're putting media on a slide, that it's on the same slide or screen as the questions. So for example, if we're doing a reading assessment and we have a paragraph to read and then we're answering questions, they should both be visible at the same time. And of course, our comprehension questions should go in order of how they appear in the sample, because you don't want, read this passage, make the reading go away. I have to go to another screen or another tab to answer questions. Maybe I have to tab to go back to read and back to check and back to read. That is not conducive to good e-learning experience. Of course, when it comes to your layout, make sure that you're adding copyright. Keep your goal to being adding as few clicks as possible to get to information. Certainly, if you have audio and you want to add a clickable transcript, that is a terrific idea. When you're giving those instructions, make sure you indicate where to start. Always a big thing. When it comes to color contrast and fonts, for color contrast, to meet sort of web compliant rules and contrasts, we usually say a contrast of 4:1. And if you go to webaim.org now or later, you'll be able to see that they will show you some contrasts that fit web standards for design contrast. You can even use some of the ones they suggest there if that color design isn't your thing. It's not my thing, so they're my best friends. The other thing when it comes to fonts is that you want to make sure when you're working with a family that you pair a family and check before you download that they are in that family. So I'm also just putting into the chat the link to fonts on Google that you can use that will give you great suggestions if you want to do that. So a lot to think about, but see here in this slide how we end up with a process that starts to integrate the principles of design with learning on a computer. So before we go on to questions, I want to show you some before and after examples that we have borrowed heavily from waterbearlearning.com. And these examples are based on Richard Meyer. And if you know Richard Meyer, he is an author of the 12 Principles of Multimedia for eLearning Design. And he has different principles about how things should look. So in this first example, on the right-hand side, we see a screenshot of a design of a slide or a page. And on the left, we see the after example. So it's the before is on the right, the after is on the left. So this has to do with Meyer's signaling principle. And it points us to pay attention to what's important on the screen. So on the right-hand side, we have an image and text. On the after, we still have an image and text. But you'll see in the after, they have highlighted what is important, and that helps point out significant information that helps the brain retain. Our next example has to do based on the modality principle. And you'll see that each of these images are in this page. The one on the left is much larger and it has no text. And the modality principle says you want to try to limit the amount of text used if you can rely on multimedia instead. So you can use text for key definitions and lists and directions, but this image is strong in and of itself, and you could add audio to it and just perhaps use the text for that supporting information you want to add. And the third example we're sharing with you today has to do with the spatial contiguity principle. Now, you'll see in the image on the right, we have a title and we have an image, but you see they're quite far apart from one another. So spatial contiguity says that related text and graphics should physically be close to one another in a frame. So it makes it easier for learners to associate the image with the text and know that they are all related together. So again, we'll give you a link where you can see more of these examples and help you when you're thinking about your e-learning designs. But for now, the good news is you do not have to remember all of this off of the top of your head, because we have put together a very handy checklist that looks like this. I am now pasting that link in the chat, and it will be, it's available now, it's available for any time to go and see this Google Doc with what we have been speaking about and this promised checklist. From here, we are going to just point out some of the resources we used and also some of the items we had going here. These 12 principles of multimedia and the other ones that didn't make it can be found in this link about Richard Meyer's principles. The font and font families on Google, previously shared in the chat. There are also a couple of books that are very handy to have and to reference. One is the eLearning and the Science, or is eLearning and the Science of Instruction. And that can be found at this link, which I'll just copy into the chat. I just searched these up on Amazon to share. And the second is called Write and Organize for Deeper Learning. And again, it helps you understand the principles and how they might help make it easier for learners to retain the information that you want them to help them learn it. So it's like getting rid of that clutter, that distraction, using the white space and optimizing that learning environment. So that brings us with, oh, look at this, 7A, we are so lucky. With exactly 10 minutes left in our session to respond to any questions or comments that may come up. So we throw the floor open for you to make a comment in the chat. And I will now go there myself and see. Sorry, I was putting a lot of things in there. Stacy asked, how can you turn off autoplay on H5P? Great question. I think by default, it is off. If once you add the audio, is Sepideh, am I correct in that? And that having it turn on is something that you have to change.
It's in the settings. So if you have access to the H5P object itself from the content bank, then when you add audio, you also have the option to tick a box, I believe, to have it autoplay or not autoplay.
Right, so you can change it there, or make sure when you're starting that you do not have it on there.
That's right. But if it's an already created H5P and you don't have access to the content bank, I don't think you could do anything about it.
Okay, so it's for developing.
That's
From
right, yeah. As
yeah,
far as I know.
yeah. If you have different experiences, please share with us. Okay. Okay, Bonnie has had to leave us. She had another meeting, then she came in. And Elizabeth says, in H5P, you can click on the answer and click where it has to go. I'm sorry, I don't know what I was talking about when you made that comment, Elizabeth, but it could have been, probably with the drag and drop, I'm guessing, is where that is. Yeah, that's another way you can click on the answer and then click where it has to go instead of having to click and drag. Okay, so I'm coming down. Okay, Vesna has asked, yeah, it's a lot to learn. It's a lot to consider. Don't think that you will be able to incorporate all of these things in the very next thing you try to create, because it's a lot. Our method of learning and having these become habit is to try one or two things every time and work to get better at it. I don't think there's a perfect level at all. And so as we slowly gain things and become aware of what we can do and how we can do it, then we will slowly gain. So take your time with it. Don't expect perfection immediately. Paul shares, you can edit existing H5Ps on Avenue. If you have it in your course, you can download a package file and then upload that to your content bank to make changes. Great, thanks for that clarification, Paul. Love that. Stacy, you have your hand up. Please unmute yourself, speak to us, because my voice is obviously leaving me here.
Thank you. Yeah, so I have a question. Sepideh, we haven't met actually, but you're on my my Avenue list. Do you have a list of courses that are currently complete inside of Avenue that you would say represent the principles that you've taught here?
That's a good question. With so many courses out there, that's a really hard question to answer.
It is. And remember, when you design, like all this design that we've had on Avenue has been over the course of years and years and years. And so we have some designs that are older, some as we've learned more things that have grown, some that are better, some that are designed in different places. We now have other organizations that are designing modules as well as whole courses. Is there one that is perfect? I would probably say probably not. But are there some really good examples, and are we looking towards moving more in this direction for development design? I'd say absolutely, based on these principles. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would appreciate, if you made like a list of these ones are old and not so good, and these ones are more like what we're going towards, then I could sort of, know what to sort of model mine more like.
Well, that's a good suggestion. We'll take that under advisement. With the 500 some more modules that, or modules that we have in all of the various courses, plus in the spring, when Onyx modules will be available to link teachers on Avenue, then that is bringing another couple of hundred over of all different designs. It would be quite a task to do that, but we'll put that on a wish list for you, Stacey, for sure.
Okay.
Thank you. Elizabeth, where can you get that wish list? It was one of the links that I put up earlier. I will be able to copy it again right now so that you can go there and look at that checklist. And remember, everyone, your gut reaction to those samples that weren't very good, let that guide you. Say, do I think this looks okay? Is it giving the learner enough space to be focused on what they're supposed to focus on? Are they using brain power to figure anything else out? And that will help guide you in your design and development. Are there questions or comments? I can notice some things, but sometimes I don't know how to fix them. Ah, that's great. And that's when our curiosity and our desire to develop palatable learning objects come in, because we want to learn how to fix them. You know, we want to ask in live help, and I know you're here, Paul. I know you pull live help for us, probably on there right now as we're doing this session. Asking questions for help with some of these resources, or how can I do this? By all means, go on and ask for, you know, where can I find out how to do this? Where can I find out how to do that? And people in live help are here, will help you, direct you to files and all that assistance. Oh, and Paul thankfully has put on the chat that John is currently staffing our Avenue Live Help, which is why why Paul is here today, and has helpfully added a link where you can go right in, and John can help you too. We all help you there. Good point, Vesna. Often there's not a lot of time to do it. It is time consuming to design e-learning. There is no two ways about that, which is part of the reason why I think we want to say start small, start with a couple of small things, and then continue to grow and get better. And then soon these things, you know, become more second nature to you. But I feel for you. I feel for me and everyone who does this. Any other questions or comments? I see we're up to 429. Sepideh.
There's one question by Sue, who wants to know how you access the design helper in PowerPoint.
Oh, okay. I think it is it's in one of the newer versions. So if you have an older version, you may not be able to find it. But in the Office 365 2019 version, I believe it was added. And when you load it, or actually mine is set up in such a way that when I start to do my slides, it asks me, it will say, oh, do you want to do that? You could also design it. And it just pops up with all these different designs. So if you have the right version of it, it actually comes up, you know, as a heading and as a separate side panel, and asks you those in there.
And I think there's a tab for design in the newer versions, but if you don't have that, there's always, I don't know exactly under which tab it falls, but you can choose diagrams, for example, and the diagrams are somehow laid out very nicely, so it won't get very busy unless you add stuff to it.
And Paul, thank you, has very helpfully added to us in the chat
Oh, yes. Mhm.
how
you.
you get to the designer. I couldn't remember all those steps. And then once you have it, it will just come on and help you. So I think you only have to do it once. A comment, I like designing H5Ps and SCORMs, takes a lot of time. 100% agree with you. Once you have a few objects and the more you create, the better one gets. Thank you for that comment. That's been our experience too.
And I think you have to resist the temptation to make it colorful or to add stuff, because when you have a platform that allows for a lot of variety, the first thing that you want to do is to add more pictures or add fancy fonts or different images or symbols. But once you do that, it could just get too much. You just need to make sure that you have your white space, which is the queen.
Exactly. Okay, folks, I think we've answered the questions in your chat. Our emails are here. Live help is available to you. And by all means, be kind to yourself and learn as you go.